The player versus environment section is all about you versus the game. That's what PvE means. It's basically just you as a player facing off against all the computer-generated enemies the developers have on offer. We're going to look at some of the most essential PvE systems, particularly dungeons and raids, which you've probably already heard me mention several times. Dungeons are scattered all across the game world, and they take multiple players to take on and triumph over. Usually, they're designed around a 5-man party. Raids, on the other hand, can host all the way up to 30 players, and they represent a more unique challenge. We have 2 activities in this section that we're going to get to, where we do both our first dungeon and our first raid, and I think you're going to have a great time doing both. Finally, we're going to touch on scenarios, a unique storytelling mechanic used by Blizzard to tell some really bombastic storylines and some really interesting quests. Let's get into it.
I've already discussed dungeons in passing quite a lot, and I imagine you're not fully clear on what a dungeon is. A dungeon is an area of the game designed to be tackled by 5 players, 1 tank, 1 healer, and 3 DPS. Dungeons always have the same layout, no matter how many times you run the dead mines. The enemies will be in the same spots, and you'll fight the same bosses. Dungeons always use a game mechanic that it's time to familiarize yourself with. These are called instanced areas. An instance is any area of the game that is not connected to the game world. When you enter an instance area, you will not be able to see any other players except players that are part of your instance. Any player that you are grouped with will enter your instance by default when entering any instanced area. The purpose of instances is to prevent hundreds or thousands of players from doing the same activities all on top of each other. So they're all the exact same, just different envelopes or parallel universes, essentially. Dungeons can be a lot of fun. They're a great distraction from the overworld. The purpose of dungeons is mostly centered around killing enemies called bosses. There are several bosses in each dungeon, each with their own unique loot table. In case you're not exactly clear what a boss is, bosses are monsters that are significantly more sturdy and dangerous than your average mob. They usually have several unique abilities that you'll have to dodge while dealing as much damage as you can to take them down. If you're successful, they will always drop rare quality items or better. Loot table is a phrase that refers to the possible items a boss can drop. For dungeons, a boss loot table usually constitutes only about 4 to 8 items, and only 1 or 2 of them will drop when the boss is slain. The items you get from the loot table are totally random. You can press Shift J and navigate to the dungeon tab to preview bosses, their abilities, and their loot tables. Dungeons are available starting very early into the game. While you can walk to the physical entrance of any dungeon and enter it manually, most players opt instead to use the Group Finder tool, which can be opened by pressing I. You'll be placed in a queue, the length of which depends on how many other players are looking. Tank and healer queues are typically significantly shorter than their DPS counterparts. Once the Group Finder has assembled a full group of players, your queue will pop, prompting you to either enter the dungeon or leave the queue. Accepting the queue will automatically teleport you into the dungeon with your new group. Using the Group Finder has distinct advantages. For example, the Luck of the Draw buff increases damage and healing based on the number of random group members you've grouped with. This is to compensate for the inherent lack of cohesion versus doing the dungeon with friends or guildmates. If you complete the entire dungeon, you are rewarded with a chunk of experience and a satchel that can contain a variety of rewards. Once you reach maximum level, there are additional tiers of difficulty available to test yourself against. The instance layouts are identical, but the bosses gain new and improved abilities as well as a boost to health and damage. There are 3 additional tiers of difficulty available in addition to the normal difficulty, and they are Heroic difficulty, Mythic difficulty, and Mythic Plus difficulty. We'll discuss the differences between Mythic Plus and the other difficulties in a later section, as there are significant differences. One important note is that there isn't any inherent incentive to kill every monster in a dungeon. In fact, most players prefer to take the shortest possible route through the dungeons, which means avoiding any unnecessary packs of monsters. This lets you kill the maximum amount of bosses in the shortest amount of time and complete more dungeons. Try not to wander off during the dungeon, as many players become frustrated with characters who are constantly pulling additional adds by accident. Now that you know exactly what a dungeon entails, it's time to set foot in your first dungeon in our next activity. I've already discussed dungeons in passing quite a lot, and I imagine you're not fully clear on what a dungeon is. A dungeon is an area of the game designed to be tackled by 5 players: 1 tank, 1 healer, and 3 DPS. Dungeons always have the same layout, no matter how many times you run the dead mines. The enemies will be in the same spots, and you'll fight the same bosses. Dungeons always use a game mechanic that it's time to familiarize yourself with. These are called instanced areas. An instance is any area of the game that is not connected to the game world. When you enter an instance area, you will not be able to see any other players except players that are part of your instance. Any player that you are grouped with will enter your instance by default when entering any instanced area. The purpose of instances is to prevent hundreds or thousands of players from doing the same activities all on top of each other. So they're all the exact same, just different envelopes or parallel universes, essentially. Dungeons can be a lot of fun. They're a great distraction from the overworld. The purpose of dungeons is mostly centered around killing enemies called bosses. There are several bosses in each dungeon, each with their own unique loot table. In case you're not exactly clear what a boss is, bosses are monsters that are significantly more sturdy and dangerous than your average mob. They usually have several unique abilities that you'll have to dodge while dealing as much damage as you can to take them down. If you're successful, they will always drop rare quality items or better. Loot table is a phrase that refers to the possible items a boss can drop. For dungeons, a boss loot table usually constitutes only about 4 to 8 items, and only 1 or 2 of them will drop when the boss is slain. The items you get from the loot table are totally random. You can press Shift J and navigate to the dungeon tab to preview bosses, their abilities, and their loot tables. Dungeons are available starting very early into the game. While you can walk to the physical entrance of any dungeon and enter it manually, most players opt instead to use the Group Finder tool, which can be opened by pressing I. You'll be placed in a queue, the length of which depends on how many other players are looking. Tank and healer queues are typically significantly shorter than their DPS counterparts. Once the group finder has assembled a full group of players, your queue will pop, prompting you to either enter the dungeon or leave the queue. Accepting the queue will automatically teleport you into the dungeon with your new group. Using the group finder has distinct advantages. For example, the Luck of the Draw buff increases damage and healing based on the number of random group members you've grouped with. This is to compensate for the inherent lack of cohesion versus doing the dungeon with friends or guildmates. If you complete the entire dungeon, you are rewarded with a chunk of experience and a satchel that can contain a variety of rewards. Once you reach maximum level, there are additional tiers of difficulty available to test yourself against. The instance layouts are identical, but the bosses gain new and improved abilities as well as a boost to health and damage. There are 3 additional tiers of difficulty available in addition to the normal difficulty, and they are Heroic difficulty, Mythic difficulty, and Mythic Plus difficulty. We'll discuss the differences between Mythic Plus and the other difficulties in a later section, as there are significant differences. One important note is that there isn't any inherent incentive to kill every monster in a dungeon. In fact, most players prefer to take the shortest possible route through the dungeons, which means avoiding any unnecessary packs of monsters. This lets you kill the maximum amount of bosses in the shortest amount of time and complete more dungeons. Try not to wander off during the dungeon, as many players become frustrated with characters who are constantly pulling additional adds by accident. Now that you know exactly what a dungeon entails, it's time to set foot in your first dungeon in our next activity. It's time to dive into our first dungeon. By the end of this activity, you'll have first-hand experience in dungeons in World of Warcraft and a significantly improved understanding of party play. This activity will take anywhere between 15 minutes to an hour depending on your current level, the dungeon the finder places you in, and the party members you're grouped with. To complete this activity, we'll follow these steps. Open up your dungeon finder and select your primary role. I recommend not queuing up as a tank, as most players will expect the tank to lead the group through the dungeon. Once your queue is ready, enter the dungeon. Wait for the rest of the group to finish readying it up and make any necessary switches to the gear or specs. When the group is ready, follow along with them. If you're a damage dealer, don't hit any monsters that the tank hasn't pulled themselves. If you're a healer, stay back and keep the group alive using your healing spells. Have your cooldowns ready for the first boss. Do as much damage and healing as possible. Once the boss is felled, be sure to loot the boss for a chance at a piece of gear. At least one person in the party is guaranteed loot. However, if you're lucky, you might all get a piece. Once your group is finished with the dungeon, you're safe to right-click on either your portrait or the dungeon eye on your minimap and select Leave Instance Group. Congratulations, adventurers. Raids are the ultimate PvE challenge in World of Warcraft. The primary purpose of raids is to provide the highest quality gear available. Raids are similar to dungeons conceptually, but on a much larger scale. Most raids have around 10 bosses, and raid bosses are significantly more difficult than their dungeon counterparts. Raids also feature significantly larger group sizes. Raids are instanced areas, but unlike dungeons, raids have a weekly reset. What this means is that you will only have a chance to receive loot from each raid boss once per week. When doing most raids, you'll receive a raid ID after killing a boss. You can view your instance IDs in the Raid Info tab. This will show you what bosses are still eligible for loot, and if you create a group, you'll automatically pick up where you left off when you enter the raid, rather than starting fresh. There are 4 difficulty tiers in raids. Each progressive difficulty adds new mechanics to the raid bosses, changing the way you deal with them noticeably. You'll have a separate ID for each difficulty, so you could run all 4 difficulties each week if you wished, independently. The rewards correspond with the difficulty, with the highest difficulties offering the highest item level gear. The 4 raid difficulties are Looking for Raid or LFR, Normal, Heroic, and Mythic. The raid sizes also depend on the raid difficulty. LFR, for example, is always 30 players, as it is done through the Raid Finder tool, similar to Dungeons. Normal and Heroic have flexible raid sizes, allowing anywhere between 10 and 30 players. The boss's health, damage, and mechanics will scale around the number of players inside the raid. Mythic difficulty is designed around a flat 20-player size. Mythic difficulty is often significantly more difficult than the other 3 difficulties, featuring entirely new sets of mechanics. Due to the fact that experience in raid groups is significantly reduced, you should never attempt raids before reaching the maximum level, despite the fact that many raids from previous expansions will be at or around your level. Additionally, once a new expansion releases, the questing gear from that expansion is typically as good or better than the previous expansion's raid gear, further enforcing this fact. Raids require a lot of coordination to attempt, and most players will consult guides or the dungeon journal before attempting to kill the bosses. Many bosses take upwards of 10 minutes to kill, and do not allow for many mistakes from the group. With 10 to 30 players having to perform well for such an extended period, you can imagine this can be a tall order, particularly on Heroic and Mythic difficulties. There's some pretty sweet incentive for the difficulty though. Raid bosses drop the best loot, and they drop a lot more than the average dungeon boss. Many raid items are so strong that some players will find their specialization practically requires certain pieces of it to be effective. This is mostly true of the unique items called trinkets. Raids can also be a lot of fun. In a dungeon, you usually expect to kill a boss on the first or second try, but when a raid is released, guilds will often work on the boss for weeks or months on the hardest difficulties, and this will be before they even get their first kill. The rush of bringing down a Leviathan and seeing that loot in your inventory is an experience that isn't matched in any other game. Don't be intimidated though. In the LFR and normal difficulties, most groups don't struggle for more than a couple of hours, and that's to complete an entire raid. The concept of attempting bosses over and over until you finally prevail is called progression. When you fail to kill a raid boss, and the group is killed, this is referred to as a wipe. Raiding-focused guilds will often spend a few months on progression, wiping over and over, slowly felling boss after boss. Once a guild is reliably killing a boss each week, this is referred to as the boss being on farm. Raiding can be pretty polarizing. Some players don't enjoy the team effort, or they don't have the time necessary to do progression. There are many players, however, who do find it so enticing that there is actually a competitive race each release to be the first team to take down new bosses. When you hit max level, you'll want to get a handle on the ropes using the LFR tool. LFR can be accessed in the same tab as the Dungeon Finder, where you can enter a queue to be matched with other players. LFR is significantly easier than any other difficulty, including normal, so you shouldn't feel too much pressure to put out a star performance. In our next activity, we'll be doing our first raid using the Looking for Raid tool. See you then. It's time to venture into our first raid. If you're not maximum level, don't worry. Come back to this activity after you've reached it. I wanted to clue you into raids as soon as possible so you're not confused by my continued mentions of them, and you'll have something to look forward and aspire to. By the end of this activity, you'll have completed your first raid using the Raid Finder tool. This will help you find your footing in the World of Warcraft endgame and start your journey towards defeating some of the greater challenges and earning powerful loot. Looking for raid typically separates the raid into different wings, so you only have to defeat 2 or 3 bosses to complete it. This activity will take between 30 and 90 minutes to complete, and you'll hopefully emerge the bearer of some entirely new gear. To complete the first raid activity, follow these steps. Just like the Dungeon Finder, go ahead and queue up using the Raid Finder tool. If you want to speed up the queue times, you can actually queue from multiple wings of Raid Finder at once. The queues even stay active while you're inside the Raid Finder, but they won't activate until after you finish the wing. This is a convenient way of getting all the wings done at once, should you desire. Once your queue has popped and you're in the raid, you just have to blend in and follow the group. Don't ever pull any enemies that the tank doesn't pull. Players in LFR can be a little testy, and pulling a boss or additional trash mobs might result in you getting kicked out. As long as you hang on with the main group and only attack the boss once the tanks have engaged, you'll be set to knock down your very first raid. Congratulations, adventurers. Scenarios are a type of instanced area primarily used for storytelling purposes. It's rare that you'll encounter scenarios, as there are only a few of them in the game. Typically, scenarios are a way of inserting a bombastic questline into an area without disrupting the regular flow of the zone. When you encounter a scenario, you'll be prompted to queue for scenarios by the game. Most scenarios are capable of being done alone, but some will place you alongside other players. Either way, you won't have to wait for a queue. This is merely a way of teleporting you to the instance area. In most scenarios, there are groups of friendly NPCs to direct and fight alongside your character. Simply follow their instructions and complete the scenario to receive any rewards, or complete the relevant quests. Good luck.
Player versus player combat is a huge facet of the game, and it's one that a ton of players really enjoy. I remember queuing into my first Battleground, and Battlegrounds are essentially these large, epic arenas where you square off against between 10 and 40 other players, and I had a real blast, and I'm really excited for you guys to get into your first Battleground, and that'll be one of our activities in this section. We'll also take a look at some of the more competitive aspects of player versus player, like skirmishes and arenas, which are a little more intimate and smaller scale. Our second activity will involve us queuing some arena skirmishes of our own, which I'm sure you'll have a blast with. Let's get into it.
Battlegrounds are one of the most popular ways for people to engage in player versus player combat. Alliance and Horde players are pitted against each other in large open areas and have to complete objectives or kill each other to take the victory. Battlegrounds, or BGs, feature large player sizes compared to other available PvP content, which can occasionally make for truly epic experiences that you can find nowhere else. There are currently 14 areas in the game that are classified as Battlegrounds, and they fall into 3 types: Capture the Flag, Warfare, and Resource Race. Capture the Flag currently has 2 Battlegrounds, Warsong Gulch and Twin Peaks. As you might expect, the objective of this game is to secure the enemy flag and return it to your keep. The first team to capture the flag 3 times, or the team with the most captures when the timer expires, is declared the victor. Due to the simple layouts of Warsong Gulch and Twin Peaks, you can expect a lot of fighting in the middle of the map. While fighting in the middle sometimes invokes the chagrin of others, and mainly the more objective-focused players, it is a ton of fun. Resource Race currently features 6 Battlegrounds: Arathi Basin, Eye of the Storm, Battle for Gilneas, Deepwind Gorge, Silvershard Mines, and Temple of Kotmogu. Arathi Basin and Battle for Gilneas are identical in how they work. The Alliance and Horde must fight to hold on to several control points. While a faction controls the capture points, their team earns resources. The team that reaches maximum resources first wins the game. Eye of the Storm and Deepwind Gorge are a combination of the control point and capture the flag game types. Several capture points are scattered around the map, which generate team resources when controlled. In both Battlegrounds, there is also a single flag, which generates additional resources if captured. In Eye of the Storm, the flag spawns in the center, and must be returned to a control point that your team holds. In Deepwind Gorge, you must capture the enemy's flag from their home base and return it to your team's keep. Silvershard Mines is a unique resource race map, where minecarts continuously spawn in the center of the arena. The minecarts are essentially mobile control points, with a twist. While players are within a small radius of the minecarts, they seize control of them for their team, and their carts generate a trickle of resources. But when the minecarts reach their destination at the end of the track, the team that controls the cart receives a large bonus of resources, similar to a flag capture. Temple of Kotmogu is also a unique resource race. 4 orbs spawn in the corners of a courtyard located at the map center. Clicking on an orb causes your character to pick it up, generating resources for your team over time. The closer you are to the center of the map, the more resources you generate. Beware, however, the longer a player controls the orb, the more damage they take. Fortunately, you also deal increased damage as well. Warfare battlegrounds center around killing the enemy forces, destroying their structures and vehicles, and capturing or eliminating the enemy commanders. These battlegrounds are typically significantly larger than the other types, and there are currently 6 warfare battlegrounds. They are Alterac Valley, Strand of the Ancients, Isle of Conquest, Wintergrasp, Tal Barad, and Ashran. Wintergrasp, Tal Barad, and Ashran were originally zones in the overworld, where players would battle it out every few hours, but they were repurposed as battlegrounds once the level cap was raised and players moved on to new areas and continents. Alterac Valley is a huge-scale 40 versus 40 battle. The objectives vary widely, including torching enemy structures, slaying enemy commanders, and eliminating the other team's players. The first team to reduce the enemy reinforcement score to 0 wins the map. You can also slay the enemy commander to win the battleground immediately. Strand of the Ancients is a battleground where the 2 factions take turns defending and attacking. The attacking team arrives by boat and has to storm the beach, attempting to break down siege gates and reach a Titan relic. The defending team attempts to slay the enemies and their siege vehicles, preventing their advance. The team that reaches the Titan relic the fastest wins. Isle of Conquest is a very large and spread out battleground, similar to Alterac Valley. The goal is to reduce the opponent's reinforcement count to 0. There are many neutral objectives around the map that can be captured, allowing you to take advantage of the siege vehicles they produce. If the enemy general is slain, your team is also victorious. Wintergrasp, Tal Barad, and Ashran are all outdoor zones that can be found in the world. Wintergrasp and Tal Barad are claimed after a match, and the victorious faction will control the zone until the next battle. Whichever faction won the previous battle will be on defense for the next battle, and will attempt to stop the enemy from taking control of the zone. If they are unsuccessful, control of the zone will switch to the other faction until the next battle. Ashran has a variety of objectives, but similar to the other warfare battlegrounds in that it revolves around fighting for the control of different objectives. Teams will fight their way across the island, slowly pushing each other back towards their keeps. The team to slay the other general first is declared the victor, and after this, the battle will reset. There's also a competitive version called Rated Battlegrounds, but these are far less popular than their normal counterparts. To queue for Rated Battlegrounds, you'll need a full team of players, and the selection of the battlegrounds is also quite limited. As I mentioned in the introduction, battlegrounds reward you with honor points. You can use honor points to purchase items and vanity rewards, such as mounts. They can also be a hell of a lot of fun. Most players will queue using the Random Battleground or Random Epic Battleground feature, and the Featured Battleground for the bonus rewards. And this significantly lowers your queue times, so I recommend it as well. Good luck on the fields of battle, adventurers. It's time to queue up for our very first battleground. The purpose of this activity is to teach you the ropes of player versus player combat, and hopefully you'll have a great time out on the fields of justice. Most battlegrounds only take between 10 and 20 minutes, and sometimes even shorter if you have a great team. By the time you've finished with your very first battleground, you'll have an idea whether you enjoy the PvP in the game or not, but I have a feeling you're really going to enjoy yourself. To complete this activity, follow these steps. Press H to open up your PvP window. We're going to be queuing up for a random battleground, so go ahead and select that now and give it the queue. Battlegrounds aren't particularly serious, so if you can't remember what you're supposed to do, just go ahead and attack the very first enemy player on site. Throw yourself into that battle. Win or lose, most players can just enjoy the epic feel of the all-out battle. Once you're done, you can move on to other activities or queue up for another. Great job out there, adventurers. You'll all be gladiators in no time. The arena is a more competitive way of engaging in player versus player combat. Not only is the size of the battlefield for arena significantly smaller and more intimate in scale, the team sizes are as well. There are 3 arena brackets currently which you can compete in: 2v2, 3v3, and 5v5. 3v3, also known as threes, is the most competitive bracket, and generally considered to be the truest form of player versus player skill expression. Most compositions involve 2 damage dealers and 1 healer. 2s are the next most competitive bracket, and allow for a wide variety of compositions, though they are generally considered a for fun bracket. 5s are the least popular arena bracket, as they are generally hard to balance around. Your arena rating determines who you are matched against and is a measure of your estimated skill. Rankings are only temporary, as the arena system is separated into seasons. Having a high rating when the season concludes can grant certain titles, achievements, and in-game rewards. You must have a party size matching the bracket you intend to play in order to participate in the arena. In other words, pre-made groups only. There is no group finder for this activity, although you can often find teammates using the pre-made group finder itself. Press H to go to the pre-made group finder for PvP and take a look. Good luck in the arena, gladiators. Skirmishes are identical to arenas. However, they are intended to be non-competitive and a way to practice arena and gain honor without putting your rating on the line. Unlike arena, you do not need a pre-made group to queue for skirmishes. Simply open the PvP activity window and queue up to get right into a skirmish, and we're about to do that in our next activity. Let's try out some skirmishes for ourselves. This activity will give you the fundamental knowledge of how skirmishes and arenas work. It's a really great way to get started, and you're kind of dipping a foot into the competitive PvP pool. We'll queue up for 3 skirmishes, allowing us to check out some of the different arena maps, get a proper feel for it, and check out some of the compositions that people are likely to run. This activity will take about 10 minutes to complete. To complete this activity, let's get started by rolling through these steps. Open the PvP pane and queue up for a skirmish. Enter the arena once your queue is ready. If you need to change your talents, make sure you do so now. Attack the enemies, being sure to use as much crowd control as possible. Protect your ally or allies. Once you've completed 3 skirmishes, you're all finished with the activity. I hope you're a little more familiar with what a skirmish or arena is now, and you're excited to get into the arena for real. Good luck out there, adventurers. Duels are one of the original PvP mechanics in World of Warcraft. While they're not really popular anymore, it's still a fun way to blow off some steam with a friend while you're waiting for queues. Sometimes players will gather outside the major cities, such as Orgrimmar, and just duel it out for fun. To challenge another player to a duel, right-click on their target frame. Duels are single combat, and straying too far from the location where the challenge was issued will cause you to forfeit. Once either player is lowered to 1 HP, their opponent is declared the winner, and the duel is concluded.
This section is all about generating gold for your character. Since gold is the main currency in World of Warcraft, it's important you have a healthy supply on you at any time. From trading with vendors to making profit with your professions, this section will be really useful for kicking your income off the ground. Our first activity will go into specifics on how to use the auction house, which I'm sure you've heard me mention. Not only will we post our first auctions, but we'll learn some of the tricks to make great and reliable profit using the auction house. Questing can be another really great source of income, which is something we'll look further into. Finally, farming profitable monsters or hunting ultra rare drops can be fantastic sources of income, which is why I really can't wait to get to those two sections in particular. I recommend paying close attention, as gold is something you can't do without. Let's get into it.
Acquiring a steady income starts with just selling off basic items to vendors. Many add-ons, which we'll talk about really soon, they'll allow you to automatically vendor junk items without a single key press, and this greatly increases the speed of your profits. It's just an efficiency thing overall. The main things we sell to vendors are junk items and any items we can't sell to players, use for professions, or equip for ourselves. This can include quest rewards, which often stack up over time, and they can really result in tens of thousands of cumulative gold when you sell them to the vendors. This method is simple and really shouldn't be overlooked, so make sure that you're looting everything that you can, and one of the best ways to do that is to keep auto loot on. While professions typically aren't the key to massive bursts of profit, they can bring in reliable returns that you can take nice advantage of. Gathering professions are typically great earners during the earliest portions of the expansion. However, you'll have to compete against all the other players hunting for the same resources, and this can be a little frustrating for some. There's no single trick to earning gold with professions. Many players have to carve out their own niches as the prices of materials are always fluctuating. Typically, enchanting and jewel crafting are very safe and reliable earners out of the crafting professions, although there are ways to make profits with all of them. I recommend scouting your auction house and trade chat prices before setting out on an item to craft or farm, as this often results in the most secure and reliable profits. Good luck with your professions. Auction houses are available in all home cities, as well as a few other select locations. The auction house allows you to post items for a nominal fee that other players can view and purchase. You can ask the guards where to find the auction house or houses in your chosen city, although there are usually a bunch of them and they're not hard to find. When you're using the auction house, you can choose multiple parameters for your item. The minimum bid is the lowest a player can bid for an item, and whoever has the highest bid when the time limit expires wins the auction. You can also choose to set a buyout, which will instantly secure the item for the player. Most players choose to purchase items that have buyouts, as it's pretty inconvenient to engage in multiple hour-long bidding wars with other players. Extremely rare items, such as items from the trading card game, are the exception, and in these cases, it's usually more worthwhile and profitable to allow for players to bid each other out instead. The auction house is the main source of profits to be made for most players. Just like in the real world, there is major profit to be made from flipping goods, kind of like playing a stock market. Finding an item that you can buy low and corner the market on is a great way to make very stable income. The trick is really to find items that you can make good margins on, and the number of possibilities for this is practically limitless. Unfortunately, I really can't give you many recommendations, as the economy for every realm is entirely different. An idea for items to flip are reagents necessary to level old professions with, for example, as they present a bottleneck that players have to get past in order to reach the maximum levels. Good luck, and in the next activity, we're going to post our first auction. It's time to get familiar with the auction house. We're going to post some items in the auction house and start earning that sweet gold. This activity will only take a moment, but it's an important one, as the auction house will likely be the hub for the majority of your trading in this game. I recommend posting things like crafting materials, ideally things that you have gathered using the professions that we acquired earlier in the course. To complete this activity, we're going to follow these steps. Choose some items to auction. As we just discussed, I recommend auctioning something easily traded, like materials for crafting. Gathering professions are perfect for acquiring such materials. Go ahead and check the standardly traded price for your items before posting them. You want to post for slightly less than the lowest price to sell quick, but don't undercut by more than 1 gold. In fact, I recommend not undercutting more than a copper, as that's all it takes for your items to show up first when someone searches. Once you have a price in mind, click on over to the Auctions tab and drag your items into the slot. Here you'll see a variety of parameters, from number of stacks to whether or not you want to set the price on a per item or per stack basis. Have a read through your options and learn the interface. It's not a particularly complex one, so it shouldn't take long to figure out. If you posted crafting items, chances are your goods will sell fairly quickly. Once they've sold, you'll receive the gold in the mail, minus the auction house cut, which is fairly marginal. Happy profiteering. Quests can be a very profitable activity, and by now, you should really be more than familiar with them. They're more than enough in the game to kickstart your income. In some cases, having the enchanting profession can be a huge bonus as well, as enchanters can disenchant armor into dust that can be used to enchant items. The type of dust corresponds to the expansion that the gear is from, so be sure to look up the respective dust prices first. It's not always worthwhile. For non-enchanters, quests provide a steady income of gold in items. The items can be sold to vendors for additional profit, usually resulting in upwards of 50 gold per quest. While this isn't a huge profit margin per hour, the gold stream can really add up, and it allows you to level characters or experience storylines for the first time. Ultimately, quests aren't a great way of making long-term gold, but when you're just starting out, they can be a great way of killing a few birds with one stone. Once you have a stable base of wealth to build off, you might move on to bigger and better things. Quests from the most recent expansions typically provide the best and most profitable rewards, so work backwards if you're already at maximum level. If you enjoy being a completionist, there are also many achievements associated with completing quests, including the Lore Master achievement. Fear not, we're not going to be out in the fields sowing seeds and harvesting crops. Farming is a gaming term that refers to the player performing repetitive actions with the aim of gaining gold, experience, or items. If you're an herbalist, you might say, I'm farming green tea leaf, which means you're specifically gathering that herb. In this case, I'm referring to farming monsters with the goal of drops for profit. This section won't really get into specifics because farmable mobs are always shifting. The main factor in flux is, of course, the price on the auction house. Some of the best monsters to farm are the ones that drop ingredients related to professions, even secondary ones like cooking and fishing. Players will pay a premium for the ingredients that enable them to acquire certain achievements. Another common type of monsters for people to farm are the humanoids that drop cloth. You can find countless amount of guides on the topic, but typically there are monsters that drop high amounts of cloth, which is used by tailors to level and make armor. A popular spot, for example, is farming Mageweave cloth in Tanaris. Farming is possibly the most common and reliable way of producing a staple income, particularly if your base of wealth isn't high enough to flip high quantities on the auction house. There are many guides on the subject and on different types of farmable monsters, but try and look for ones that are recent, as the best techniques are constantly evolving. Happy hunting! This section could technically fall under farming. However, hunting for rare battle pets is somewhat different. There are a plethora of rare spawns in World of Warcraft that drop items such as battle pets, toys, and mounts. Being the first to kill these monsters, some of which only spawn once every several days, can be extremely difficult, but the rewards are also great. This method of profit requires the greatest dedication, and it isn't as reliable as some of the other techniques that we already discussed. The upside, however, is that the profit potential is far greater, and it comes in satisfyingly large chunks. Players will often pay tens of thousands of gold, sometimes hundreds of thousands, for pets like Drudge Ghoul or a mount like Poseidus. Check the auction house for some current prices of rare pets. Look up their drop location and get hunting. In conclusion, making gold in World of Warcraft is typically a long process, and it gets easier as you acquire more capital. It's kind of like a snowman. Once you get that ball rolling, it starts to pick up a lot more snow. Best of luck out there, and happy hunting, adventurers.
Pet battling is one of the primary minigames in World of Warcraft. Battle pets can be hunted, captured, and fought all over Azeroth in any and every zone. In this section, we'll cover everything you need to know about pet battles, from the mechanics of a pet battle to how to capture a battle pet of your own. And our activity for this section, we'll conduct a pet battle and make sure you come out victorious. Let's get into it.
Well, we discussed the acquisition of rare battle pets in our gold making section. Most pets don't require such effort to obtain. Pets can be found and fought, subsequently captured in every zone around the world. From common chickens to tigers and bugs, many common creatures can be found around the game world. You can track battle pets using the minimap feature, and you'll soon find they are all around you. When you hover over a battle pet, the cursor will change to the green pet icon. Right-click on them to engage in a pet battle. Pet battles are simple Pokemon-style battles, where your pet dukes it out with the opposition. Pets typically only have a couple of attacks, which can be strategically used to the debuffs they apply. Pets also have different types as well as different strengths and weaknesses versus other types. This adds a dash of strategy in an otherwise fairly straightforward minigame. Pet battling doesn't have any inherent benefit for your character advancement, but some players find it to be a delightful side activity. Many players also just like to collect as many pets as they can, growing their collection for personal pride and achievements. Gotta catch 'em all, right? After you've initiated a pet battle, you'll be placed into the pet battle interface. At the top of the screen, you'll see the health bars of both pets squaring off. Your pet on the left and the enemy pet on the right. You can also see whose turn it is, and it'll be highlighted. Down at the bottom of your screen, your pet's abilities are shown. When it's your turn, your pet will be able to attack once. Choose one of the abilities by hitting the hotkey, or simply just clicking on it. If you're fighting against pets in the wild, you can attempt to capture them by hitting trap. It will sometimes fail to succeed on the first try, but if you keep at it, you'll eventually come out victorious. After a pet battle, you'll have to heal your pets in the pet tab. Click Revive Battle Pets to restore them to full health. This can be done once every 10 minutes. You can also speak to a battle pet master or trainer to heal your pets. Additionally, certain bandages are available and can be purchased on the auction house. Pets have 3 stats. Health, which determines how much damage your pet can take before fainting. Power, which determines how strong your pet's attacks are. And speed, which determines which of the 2 pets attacks first. Pets also come in 4 qualities: poor, common, uncommon, and rare. These are essentially different versions of the same pet. A rare Ancona chicken will be vastly superior to a common one, and so on. Leveling pets is very straightforward. You simply fight other pets and earn experience. The maximum pet level is currently 25, and there are several battle quest lines that can be acquired from the trainers in the capital cities as well. There are a variety of master tamers scattered throughout Azeroth, representing the final challenge of the PvE pet battle experience. Defeating them unlocks pet battle daily quests and the title tamer. Did someone say the Elite Four? Pet battles can also be issued to other players, similar to duels. Finally, You can duel random players using the Find Battle button in the Pet tab. Pet battling is a fun distraction for some, and an opportunity to take part in collecting and hunting down the best and rarest pets. If this seems interesting to you, we're going to give it a try in the next activity. We're going to do something a little different and try out the pet battling system. This activity will teach us a new minigame that some players find quite entertaining. Learning to become a pet battler and acquire your first few battle pets only takes a few minutes. Let's get started. We're going to follow these steps and complete the activity. To become a pet battler, you must be a minimum of level 5. You must purchase Battle Pet training for 10 gold from a Battle Pet trainer, and these NPCs can be found in the player's starting area or in the faction's capital cities. Ask a guard if you're not sure where to go. Head out into the nearest zone to look for your first few pet battles. Using the pet tracking utility on the minimap allows you to find nearby pets. Ensure you have an active pet. Right-click on the battle pet you found and get ready to fight. If you want to trap the enemy pet, be sure you do so before you finish the enemy off. Great work. You've completed your first pet battle. Try a few more if you had fun and get comfortable. You can also try queuing for a PvP pet battle if you're feeling confident. Good luck out there.